Have you ever felt that some truths are better left buried? That some secrets become so deeply intertwined with who we are that revealing them might unravel everything we've built? For Eleanor Thompson, a 67-year-old retired school teacher with kind eyes that had seen too much, this question wasn't philosophical. It was the weight she had carried for 30 years. The sunlight streamed through the bay windows of Eleanor's dining room, casting a warm glow over the Mother's Day table. She had meticulously prepared. Crystal glasses sparkled, reflecting tiny rainbows onto the cream-colored tablecloth. The scent of roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes filled the air, mingling with the fragrance of the fresh peonies in the centerpiece. "Mom, this looks amazing," Jessica exclaimed as she entered, her husband Michael and their teenage daughter Lily following behind. "You really didn't have to go all out." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she embraced her daughter. Today wasn't just any Mother's Day celebration. Today, after 3 decades of rehearsing this moment in her mind, she would finally speak the truth. "Nonsense," Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than her nerves. "It's not every day I get to spoil my favorite people." The meal progressed with the comfortable rhythm of family gatherings, compliments on the food, updates on work and school, gentle teasing and shared memories. But beneath this familiar dance, Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "Before dessert," Eleanor said, setting down her napkin, "there's something I need to tell you, Jessica." The slight waver in her voice immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Jessica looked up, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you sick?" No, nothing like that," Eleanor assured her quickly. "But it's something I should have told you a long time ago." She glanced at Michael and Lily. "Something I should have told all of you." Michael discreetly touched Jessica's hand. "Maybe Lily and I should—" "No," Eleanor interrupted. "Your family. This affects all of you." The dining room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Jessica's expression shifted from concern to confusion as she studied her mother's face. "Honey," Eleanor began, her voice barely above a whisper, "what I'm about to tell you, it's going to change how you see me, maybe how you see yourself." Jessica's brow furrowed. "Mom, you're scaring me." Eleanor took a deep breath and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Jessica, the story I've told you about your father, about how he died in that car accident before you were born, that's not what happened." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Jessica's face drained of color. "What do you mean?" Her voice was small, childlike. Eleanor's hands clutched the edge of the table. "Your father didn't die before you were born, Jessica. He's alive." The crystal glasses no longer sparkled. The warm glow of the room seemed to dim as Jessica's world tilted on its axis. "Alive?" She repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. What are you saying?" "His name isn't Robert Thompson either. It's Daniel Mercer. And he didn't know about you until years after you were born. By then, I'd already told you he was dead, and I was too afraid to change our story." Jessica's chair scraped harshly against the floor as she stood up. "You're telling me my father has been alive all this time? That everything you ever told me about him was a lie?" "Not everything," Eleanor pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. "The love I described, how much he would have loved you, that part was true. I couldn't tell you the rest." "The rest?" Jessica's voice rose, edged with hysteria. "The rest being that he's alive. That's not some minor detail, Mom. That's... Words failed her. Michael placed a steadying hand on Jessica's shoulder, while Lily sat frozen, witnessing her mother's identity crumbling in real time. "Why now?" Jessica finally asked, her voice raw. "Why tell me now, after 30 years of lies?" Eleanor reached for a small envelope beside her plate that no one had noticed before. "Because he's dying, Jessica. Daniel is dying, and his last wish is to meet you. He's been asking for years, but I always refused. Now there's no more time for my cowardice." Jessica stared at the envelope, her hand shaking as she finally reached for it. Inside was a photograph of an elderly man with Jessica's eyes and smile, and an address in Portland, just 2 hours away. "All this time," Jessica whispered. "He's been that close?" The dessert sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. Outside, clouds had covered the sun, casting the dining room in shadow. In the space of 5 minutes, Jessica's understanding of herself of her origin story had been completely rewritten. "There's more," Eleanor said, her voice now steady with the strange relief of finally speaking her truth. "About why I kept you from each other, about what happened between us. But right now, I think you need to decide if you want to hear it at all. What could be so terrible that it justified hiding a father from his daughter for 30 years? And why, on this day meant for celebrating motherhood, had Eleanor chosen to detonate this bomb that would forever change their relationship? Boston, 1982. The city pulsed with possibility as Eleanor Walsh crossed the campus of Boston University, her art portfolio clutched tightly against her chest. At 23, she was a vision of early 80s confidence. Feathered brown hair catching the autumn light, eyes bright with ambition, a vintage leather jacket over her favorite Fleetwood Mac t-shirt. "Eleanor, wait up," called Maggie, her roommate and best friend since freshman year. Eleanor paused, turning with a smile that could light up the darkest corner of any gallery. "Professor Harmon loved my series, said it was evocative of Rothko with a distinctly feminist perspective. Can you believe it?" "Of course I can," Maggie replied, linking her arm through Eleanor's. "You're the most talented person in our program. The galleries in Soho are going to be fighting over you next year." The world was spread before Eleanor like a blank canvas. New York after graduation, then maybe Paris. She'd been saving every penny from her job at the campus bookstore for a tiny apartment in the city where art actually mattered. Her paintings were already catching attention, with a small but growing collection of admirers who saw what her professors saw: raw talent and unique vision. "You coming to Nikki's party tonight?" Maggie asked as they entered their favorite coffee shop just off campus. "Wouldn't miss it," Eleanor replied, breathing in the comforting aroma of coffee and pastries. "I heard Daniel might be there." "Daniel Mercer? The architecture grad student who keeps accidentally running into you at the library?" Maggie waggled her eyebrows dramatically. "Stop it," Eleanor laughed, but the blush creeping up her neck betrayed her. "We're just friends. Friends who stare at each other like they're memorizing every detail," Maggie teased. That night, the cramped apartment vibrated with music and laughter. Eleanor stood in a corner, discussing the merits of abstract expressionism with a fellow art student when she felt a presence beside her. "You know," said a voice that immediately set her heart racing, "I've always thought art and architecture are perfect complements. One creates the emotion, the other frames it." She turned to find Daniel Mercer smiling down at her, his dark curls falling just so over intelligent eyes. "That's a very poetic way of saying architects just build boxes for the real artists," she challenged, a playful smile on her lips. "Ouch." He clutched his chest in mock pain. "You wound me, Eleanor Walsh. You know my name?" she asked, suddenly shy. "I've been working up the courage to talk to you for weeks," he admitted. "Everyone knows the brilliant Eleanor Walsh." That night turned into morning as they talked on the fire escape, their breath visible in the cold air, the city lights blinking below like stars fallen to earth. By sunrise, Eleanor knew, with the certainty that only comes once in a lifetime, that her carefully planned future had just shifted irrevocably. Their romance blazed through winter into spring, intense, all-consuming, the kind you only find when you're young enough to believe love conquers all. Daniel's sketches of impossible buildings mingled with Eleanor's canvases in her tiny bedroom. They talked of Paris, of shared studios, of creating something beautiful together. "I got it." Daniel burst into Eleanor's apartment one rainy April evening, soaking wet but radiant with excitement. The fellowship in Chicago, the one with Calloway and Schmidt. Eleanor's smile froze on her face. Chicago, not New York, not Paris. That's amazing, she managed, knowing it was. Calloway and Schmidt was one of the most prestigious architecture firms in the country. This fellowship was everything Daniel had worked for. "It's just for 2 years, he said, taking her hands. "Then we can go anywhere. New York, Paris, wherever your art takes you. But this opportunity, Elle, it's once in a lifetime." She nodded, trying to picture herself in Chicago, trying to imagine putting New York on hold. Could her art thrive there? Would galleries care about an unknown painter from the Midwest? "We'll figure it out," Daniel promised, pressing his forehead to hers. "You and me." By June, decisions loomed. Eleanor had been offered a coveted spot in a summer program at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, a stepping stone to everything she'd dreamed of. "Take it," Daniel urged. "We'll do long distance until September. Then you'll come to Chicago. It's just a few months apart. But as summer unfolded, Eleanor's work garnered attention. A small gallery in Soho wanted to feature her in a group show. A mentor suggested she apply for a residency program. "I can't just leave all this," she told Daniel during one of their nightly calls. "It's happening, Danny. Everything I've worked for. And I can't turn down Chicago," he replied, his voice strained. "This is my foot in the door." The calls grew shorter, the silences longer. By August, when Daniel flew in for one last weekend, before his move, they both felt it, the inevitable collision of dreams that couldn't coexist. "Come with me," he pleaded on their last night together in her tiny apartment, the sheets tangled around them, the city humming outside her window. "Stay." "With me," she countered. Neither could yield. Neither should have to. Their goodbye at the airport was a study in restraint. Two people desperately trying to hold together something already cracked beyond repair. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it more than she'd meant anything. 2 weeks later, the nausea started, then the missed period. The plastic test with its undeniable blue line. Eleanor sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the tiny indicator that had just derailed everything. New York, Paris, her career, her life. What would happen to the girl with the promising future? The girl whose paintings spoke of freedom and possibility, if she became a mother now? And what would happen to Daniel's dreams if she told him? The choice she made that day would echo through 3 decades. A secret kept, a life reimagined, and a daughter who would grow up believing a beautiful lie. The walls of Eleanor's tiny New York apartment seemed to close in around her as she sat on the edge of her bed, the pregnancy test still clutched in her trembling hand. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm. Taxi horns, distant sirens, voices rising and falling, oblivious to how her world had just imploded. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Not now. Not when everything is finally falling into place." She'd just been offered a position as assistant curator at a small but respected gallery in Soho. Her own work was gaining attention. Critics had used words like promising and fresh perspective. All the years of sacrifice, of doubting herself, of pushing against her parents' practical concerns, they were finally being vindicated. And now this. Eleanor placed a hand on her still flat stomach, trying to comprehend the reality that a new life was forming inside her. Daniel's child. Their child. What would you do? Eleanor asked Maggie later that evening, her untouched cup of tea growing cold on the coffee table between them. Maggie's usually animated face was serious, contemplative. "I can't answer that for you, Elle. This is your body, your career, your life, and Daniel's child," Eleanor added, the words still strange on her tongue. "Have you told him yet?" Eleanor shook her head. "He just started at Calloway and Schmidt. This fellowship is everything to him. He deserves to know, Elle." "And then what?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "He gives up his dream to come back here? Or I give up everything I've worked for to go to Chicago? Or we try to parent from opposite ends of the country? None of those options work, Maggie." The phone call to her mother that night was no more illuminating. Catherine Walsh, ever practical, ever traditional, had a simpler view. "You'll marry him, of course," she stated, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. "A child needs both parents, Eleanor." "Mom, it's not that simple. Life rarely is, dear, but sometimes it gives us clear signposts. This is one of them. Clear signposts. As if this unexpected pregnancy was somehow divine intervention, steering her away from the selfish pursuit of art toward the proper role of wife and mother. For 3 days, Eleanor barely left her apartment. She called in sick to the gallery, ignoring the concerned messages from her new boss. She stared at canvases she couldn't bring herself to touch. She picked up the phone to call Daniel a dozen times, replacing the receiver before dialing. On the 4th day, she received a letter. Daniel's familiar handwriting on the envelope made her heart contract painfully. "I miss you every day," he'd written. "Chicago is everything I hoped professionally, but nothing without you. My advisor says I'm doing exceptional work. They're already talking about extending my fellowship into a permanent position. I know we said we wouldn't do this, wouldn't make each other feel guilty, but I can't help wondering if we made a mistake. If our dreams are worth the cost of losing each other." Eleanor read the letter 4 times, tears blurring the ink on the final reading. Then she made her decision. She wouldn't tell him. Not now. when he was just finding his footing, not when telling. Him would force an impossible choice, his career or his child. She loved him too much to make him choose, and feared too much what his choice might be. Instead, she would move home to Connecticut, have the baby, and figure out a way to keep pursuing her art. Perhaps not in the fast-paced New York scene she'd dreamed of, but somehow. She would tell Daniel eventually, when they were both more established, when the timing wasn't so cruel. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Maggie asked, helping Eleanor pack up her tiny apartment 2 weeks later. "Not telling him feels wrong, Elle. It's temporary," Eleanor insisted, carefully wrapping a small painting Daniel had done of her. "Just until the time is right, until we're both in a better position." But time has a way of solidifying temporary decisions. In Connecticut, Eleanor's mother took control with practiced efficiency. A story was crafted. Eleanor had married a young architect who died tragically in a car accident before their child was born. The Walsh family's liberal use of the Boston Walshes and the Connecticut Walshes to distinguish branches of their extended family made the deception surprisingly easy to maintain. By the time Jessica was born, a perfect little girl with Daniel's dark curls and Eleanor's determined chin, the lie had been repeated so often it had taken on a life of its own. Eleanor would often sit by Jessica's crib, watching her daughter sleep, composing letters to Daniel in her head. "She has your eyes," she would write in these phantom letters. "She's so curious about everything just like you." But she never sent them. Each milestone, Jessica's first steps, first words, first day of school, made the chasm of unshared time grow wider, the lie harder to undo. When Jessica was 4, Eleanor finally gathered the courage to find out where Daniel was. A quick call to an old classmate revealed he had indeed been offered a permanent position at Callaway and Schmidt. More surprisingly, he had recently gotten married. Eleanor hung up the phone, her hand shaking. He had moved on, built a life that didn't include space for unexpected revelations from the past. "It's better this way," her mother insisted, when Eleanor, in a moment of weakness, confessed her doubts. What good would it do now, disrupting everyone's lives? The child has a beautiful story about a father who would have loved her. Let that be enough. And for a time, it was. Eleanor built a new life in Connecticut, teaching art at a local college, raising Jessica, even dating occasionally, though never letting anyone get too close to her carefully constructed reality. But secrets have weight. And as the years passed, Eleanor's grew heavier, a stone around her neck that no one else could see. "Mommy, what was Daddy like?" 6-year-old Jessica asked, her small fingers tracing the outline of the framed photograph on her nightstand. Eleanor froze in the doorway, her daughter's bedtime story clutched in her hands. This wasn't the first time Jessica had asked about her father, but the questions were becoming more specific, more difficult to answer without adding layers to the elaborate fiction. "He was very handsome," Eleanor said, settling onto the edge of Jessica's bed. "And smart. So smart. He could look at an empty space and imagine a beautiful building there. Like magic?" Jessica's eyes widened. "Sort of like magic," Eleanor smiled, brushing a dark curl from her daughter's forehead. "But with lots of math and science, too." "Did he like ice cream?" Jessica pressed. "What was his favorite color? Did he read me stories like you do?" Each question was a tiny dagger. Eleanor had fabricated a character, Robert Thompson, the brilliant young architect with a kind smile who would have adored his daughter. But the details, the texture of a real person, those were harder to maintain. "He loved chocolate ice cream," Eleanor improvised, feeling a twinge of guilt. Daniel had actually hated chocolate, preferring strawberry. His favorite color was blue. "And he would have read you the best stories?" "Would have," Jessica repeated softly. Even at 6, she caught the nuance. "Because he's in heaven." "Yes, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, the familiar ache spreading through her chest. "Because he's in heaven." As Jessica grew, the questions evolved. By 3rd grade, she wanted to know how her parents met. By 5th grade, she asked about the accident that took her father's life. In middle school, she wondered if she could visit his grave. Each question forced Eleanor to elaborate on the fiction, to create new details that she carefully recorded in a journal to ensure consistency. The lie grew more complex, a living thing that needed constant tending. "Mom, can I have this?" 14-year-old Jessica asked one rainy Saturday as they cleaned out the attic. She held up a dusty sketchbook, its leather cover worn at the edges. Eleanor's heart stopped. Daniel's sketchbook. She'd forgotten it was up here, tucked away in a box of college memorabilia. "Where did you find that?" she asked, her voice unnaturally. "Hi. In that box over there," Jessica replied, already flipping through the pages. "These drawings are amazing. Was Dad an artist too?" The moment hung between them. Eleanor could snatch the book away, claim it was someone else's, add another layer to the fiction, or she could offer her daughter this small, genuine connection to her real father. "Yes," she finally said. "He loved to sketch. You can have it." Jessica beamed, clutching the book to her chest. "Thanks, Mom. I want to put it on my bookshelf with Dad's photo." That night, Eleanor sat alone in her studio, surrounded by half-finished paintings that never quite captured the promise of her early work. The decision to let Jessica keep Daniel's sketchbook gnawed at her. It was dangerous. What if Jessica somehow connected the dots? But denying her daughter that tangible link had felt like a greater cruelty. There were other close calls over the years. The time Jessica's 7th grade social studies project on family trees had required information about grandparents Eleanor had never mentioned. The awkward questions from Jessica's high school boyfriend about why there were no wedding photos of Eleanor and Robert. The DNA testing kit Jessica's college roommate had given as a birthday gift, which Eleanor had accidentally knocked into. The sink. "Don't you think it's weird that we never visit Dad's family?" 16-year-old Jessica asked once, after returning from a friend's large family reunion. "Your father was an only child, honey," Eleanor replied, the practiced lie coming easily now. "And his parents passed away before you were born. So it's just us," Jessica said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "Just us," Eleanor echoed, pushing down the guilt. "But we're enough, aren't we?" "Of course we are, Mom." Jessica had smiled, squeezing her hand. "We've always been enough, but there were moments when the weight of the deception became almost unbearable." When Jessica graduated high school as valedictorian, Eleanor had scanned the crowd, imagining Daniel there, bursting with pride. When Jessica earned a scholarship to study architecture, a career choice that had made Eleanor both proud and terrified, she'd nearly broken down during the celebration dinner. "You remind me so much of your father sometimes," she'd said, the truth slipping out before she could catch it. "Really?" Jessica had brightened instantly. "In what way?" "The way you see spaces," Eleanor recovered quickly. "The way you can visualize something from nothing." There were moments, too, when Eleanor nearly confessed. Late nights when Jessica was going through her first heartbreak, the day Jessica announced her engagement to Michael, the morning after Jessica's own daughter, Lily, was born. Each time, Eleanor would start to form the words, "There's something I need to tell you about your father," but her courage would falter at the last moment. The right time never seemed to arrive, and with each passing year, the potential fallout grew more devastating. What would it do to Jessica to learn that her entire understanding of half her identity was based on a lie? How could Eleanor explain that she'd maintained this deception not out of malice, but out of what had once seemed like love and protection? And so the secret remained, growing heavier with each milestone, each question, each moment when Daniel's features emerged in Jessica's smile or mannerisms, a secret so deeply embedded in their relationship that Eleanor sometimes wondered if extracting it might kill them both. Eleanor stood in the doorway of her home studio, watching the late afternoon light filter through the windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. At 53, she still painted, though the bold, promising artist of her youth had given way to a more restrained, technically proficient creator of landscapes that sold well at local galleries but never quite satisfied her. She moved to the easel where her current work in progress waited, a scene from the Connecticut shoreline that countless tourists would find appealing, safe, marketable. Nothing like the raw, emotional pieces she'd created before Jessica was born. "Is that all you are now?" she whispered to herself, brush in hand. "Someone who creates pretty pictures that match people's sofas?" The phone rang, startling her. Eleanor knew without checking the caller ID that it would be Jessica, calling for their weekly Sunday chat. "Hey, Mom," Jessica's voice came through, warm and bright. "How's the new painting coming along?" "Slowly," Eleanor replied, forcing lightness into her tone. "How's the Robertson project?" "Challenging, but in the best way. Michael says I'm obsessing, but the client actually suggested we incorporate some unusual angles in the main living space that most architects wouldn't attempt. It's like he read my mind." Eleanor closed her eyes, Daniel's face flashing in her memory. How many times had he expressed the same frustration with conventional architecture? the same excitement when clients were willing to take risks. "That sounds wonderful, honey," she managed. "Mom, you okay? You sound tired." "Just a little headache," Eleanor lied, adding yet another untruth to the mountain she'd accumulated over 3 decades. Nothing serious. After they hung up, Eleanor sank into her chair, the familiar waves of guilt washing over her. Every conversation with Jessica contained these moments, these painful reminders of Daniel and her daughter's passion, her creativity, her way of seeing the world. The lies had become a prison of Eleanor's own making. Even simple questions about family medical history required careful navigation. When Jessica was diagnosed with a minor heart arrhythmia at 27, a condition that ran in Daniel's family, Eleanor had been forced to feign surprise and concern, while secretly knowing exactly where it had come from. Sleep eluded Eleanor, more often these days, her nights filled with imagined conversations with Daniel. "She's so much like you," she would tell him in these waking dreams. "She became an architect without ever knowing, as if it were coded in her DNA along with your smile." The guilt was a constant companion, but there was something else too, fear. Fear that had calcified over the years into a hard shell around her heart. Fear of Jessica's reaction if she ever learned the truth. Fear of losing the unconditional love of the only person who truly mattered in Eleanor's world. Eleanor had seen that fear reflected in her mother's eyes before Catherine Walsh passed away 8 years ago. On her deathbed, Catherine had clutched Eleanor's hand, suddenly urgent. "You should tell her," she'd whispered, her voice frail but insistent. "Before it's too late." "Tell who what, Mom?" Eleanor had asked, though she knew exactly what her mother meant. "Jessica, about her real father." Catherine's eyes had filled with tears. "I was wrong to push you to keep it secret. I thought I was protecting you both, but secrets, they poison everything eventually." But Eleanor couldn't bring herself to follow her mother's deathbed advice. The lie had grown too large, too integrated into the fabric of their lives. How could she possibly unravel it now, when Jessica was building her own family, her own life? The closest she'd come was 5 years ago, when a routine mammogram had revealed a suspicious mass. Waiting for the biopsy results, facing her own mortality, Eleanor had drafted a letter to Jessica revealing everything. She'd sealed it in an envelope marked, "To be opened in the event of my death," and hidden it in her desk drawer. When the mass proved benign, she'd burned the letter, relief and cowardice mingling as she watched the paper curl and blacken in the fireplace. "You're a coward," she told her reflection that night. "You've always been a coward." But was it really cowardice? Or was it love? The desire to protect Jessica from a painful truth that would serve no purpose except to satisfy Eleanor's need. For absolution? The boundaries between selfishness and protection had blurred years ago. Eleanor no longer knew which impulse drove her continued silence. There were physical manifestations of the secret's weight too. The chronic tension in her shoulders. The migraines that came more frequently with each passing year. The bouts of insomnia that left her exhausted and frayed. Her few close friends noticed. "You seem burdened," her colleague Martha had observed over lunch recently. "Is everything all right with Jessica and the family?" "Everything's fine," Eleanor had smiled reflexively. Just the usual stress of getting older. But it wasn't fine. Nothing had been truly fine since that day in her New York bathroom, when she'd made a choice that would define the rest of her life. There were moments of joy, of course. Jessica's achievements, the birth of Lily, holidays and celebrations, and ordinary days filled with the simple pleasure of her daughter's company. But beneath it all ran the constant, exhausting current of deception. Sometimes Eleanor wondered what Daniel's life was like now. Had he found fulfillment in his career? In his marriage? Did he have other children who shared Jessica's dark curls and determined chin? What would he say if he knew about the daughter she'd kept from him? She'd looked him up once, about 15 years ago, finding a few professional mentions in architectural journals. By then, he was a partner at a prestigious firm in Chicago. His work featured in glossy spreads showcasing innovative urban spaces. She'd closed the browser quickly, before temptation could lead her further down that dangerous path. As Eleanor approached her 6th decade, the secret had become both lighter and heavier. Lighter because it was so familiar, so practiced. Heavier because time was running out for truth, for redemption, for whatever peace might come from finally speaking the words she'd held back for 30 years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, an ordinary envelope with an unfamiliar Chicago postmark. That sat among the bills and flyers on Eleanor's kitchen counter. She almost tossed it with the junk mail, but something about the handwritten address made her pause. When she finally opened it, the world seemed to stop spinning. Dear Eleanor, it began in a handwriting she would have recognized anywhere, despite the 3 decades that had passed. I hope this letter finds you well. I've thought about contacting you many times over the years, but never found the courage until now. Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. I recently received some difficult news. The letter continued. I've been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The prognosis isn't good. Months, not years. It's strange how facing the end brings clarity about what truly matters. Her hands trembled so violently that the paper shook, Daniel's words blurring before her eyes. I've had a good life, Eleanor. A fulfilling career. A marriage that, while not perfect, brought companionship. The one regret that haunts me is how we left things. Unfinished. Unresolved. In my darkest moments during treatment, your face appears to me, and I wonder what might have been. Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. My wife, Rebecca, passed away 3 years ago. We never had children. Sometimes I think that was for the best. I'm not sure I would have been a good father. The irony of those words sent a physical pain through Eleanor's chest. Not a good father. If only he knew. I've asked my assistant to help me locate people from my past that I'd like to make peace with before the end. You were at the top of that list. If you're reading this, it means she found you. The letter continued, providing a phone number and email address, an invitation to connect if Eleanor was willing. It ended simply. With enduring affection, Daniel. Eleanor read the letter 7 times, each reading bringing fresh tears. Daniel was dying. Daniel had no children, at least none he knew about. Daniel was thinking of her after all these years. The realization that had been forming in her mind for the past few days now crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity. Jessica needed to know the truth, and she needed to know it while there was still time for her to meet her father. But how? Where would she even begin to unravel a deception that had defined their relationship for Jessica's entire life? Eleanor spent the next 3 days in a fog, barely eating, barely sleeping. She called in sick to the community college where she taught art classes, unable to face her students with this storm raging inside her. On the 3rd day, she received a call from Jessica. Mom? Martha called me. She said you've missed your classes this week and aren't returning her calls. Are you okay? I'm fine, honey, Eleanor lied reflexively. Just a bad cold. You don't sound fine, Jessica pressed. You sound different. I'm worried about you. Really, I'm okay. But even as she said the words, Eleanor felt something crack inside her. The dam she'd built to contain 3 decades of deception. I'll come over, Jessica decided. I can. Bring some soup and— No, Eleanor interrupted, more sharply than she intended. I mean, there's no need. I'm already feeling better. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Mom, Jessica finally said, her voice gentle but firm. What's really going on? You know you can tell me anything, right? Anything. If only that were true. After hanging up, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, Daniel's letter before her, and made a decision. She would tell Jessica everything, but not over the phone, not in some haphazard emotional confession. She would do it thoughtfully, carefully, with all the love and respect her daughter deserved. Mother's Day was coming up in 2 weeks. Jessica and her family always came for lunch. It seemed fitting somehow, telling her the truth on a day meant to honor motherhood, with all its complexities, its imperfections, its fierce and sometimes misguided love. The preparation was both practical and emotional. Eleanor retrieved a box from her attic, filled with mementos she'd kept hidden for decades. Old photos of her and Daniel, letters they'd exchanged during that magical year together, the positive pregnancy test she'd somehow never been able to throw away. She wrote down everything she wanted to say, rehearsing the words until they flowed naturally. She steeled herself for Jessica's anger, her sense of betrayal, the questions that would undoubtedly come. Most difficult of all, she contacted Daniel. Eleanor, he breathed when he answered her call, her name still sounding like a prayer on his lips despite the weakness in his voice. I wasn't sure you'd reach out. Daniel, she replied, her heart racing. I got your letter. I'm so sorry about your diagnosis. Life's full of surprises, isn't it? He said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Not all of them good. They talked for an hour, about his career, about her teaching, about the years that had passed. She didn't mention Jessica. Not yet. That revelation deserved its own conversation. I'd like to see you, Daniel said before they hung up. If that's not too much to ask. I'd like that too, Eleanor replied, meaning it more than she could express. But there's something I need to do first. Something important. Can I call you? In a few weeks? He agreed, though she heard the unspoken awareness in his voice. For him, time was the most precious commodity now, not something to be casually deferred. As Mother's Day approached, Eleanor's resolve was tested repeatedly. The temptation to call Jessica and confess everything immediately was nearly overwhelming. The equally powerful urge to burn Daniel's letter and continue the deception pulled at her with familiar strength. But for once in her life, Eleanor stood firm against both impulses. She would tell the truth, all of it, and she would do it right. The Monday before Mother's Day, Eleanor went to her doctor and requested a prescription for anti-anxiety medication, something to steady her nerves for the conversation ahead. As she left the pharmacy, pill bottle in hand, she caught her reflection in a store window. You can do this, she told herself. You have to do this. For Jessica, for Daniel, and finally, after 30 years of running from the truth, for herself, Mother's Day arrived with a sky so perfectly blue it seemed almost cruel, as if the universe should have provided storm clouds to match the tumult in Eleanor's heart. She'd been up since dawn, preparing the meal with mechanical precision, her mind rehearsing the words she would soon speak. The dining room table was set with her best china, fresh peonies arranged in the center, the good silver polished to a mirror shine. If this was to be the last normal meal they shared before everything changed, Eleanor wanted it to be beautiful. When the doorbell rang at precisely noon, Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and opened the door with a smile that felt like glass on her face. Happy Mother's Day, Jessica beamed, handing her a beautifully wrapped gift and a bouquet of lilies. Behind her, Michael carried a bottle of champagne, and Lily, now 14, offered a homemade card with teenage awkwardness. Thank you, sweetheart, Eleanor managed, embracing her daughter tightly, perhaps a moment too long. Everything smells wonderful, Jessica commented as they entered the dining room. You've outdone yourself, Mom. The meal began normally enough, compliments on the food, family updates, gentle teasing. Eleanor found herself studying Jessica's face with new intensity, cataloging every feature that came from Daniel, the arch of her eyebrows, the way she gestured when making a point, the thoughtful pause before she answered a question. Mom? Jessica's voice cut through her thoughts. Are you listening? I was telling you about the Adams project. I'm sorry, honey, Eleanor said, setting down her fork. I'm a bit distracted today. Are you feeling okay? Jessica's concern was immediate. You've been acting strange lately. The moment had arrived sooner than Eleanor had planned. She looked at Michael, then at Lily, then back to Jessica. Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about. Something important. A silence fell over the table. Jessica exchanged a glance with Michael. Is everything okay? Are you sick? The fear in Jessica's voice made Eleanor's heart constrict. No, nothing like that, she assured quickly. But it is significant. It's about your father. Jessica's expression shifted from concern to confusion. My father? Mom, what are you talking about? Eleanor's hands trembled as she carefully folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. After dessert, Jessica, would you join me in the living room? Michael and Lily can— No, Jessica interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. Whatever this is, you can say it here. We're family. Eleanor hesitated, looking at her granddaughter's young face, then at Michael's steady, supportive presence. You're right, she conceded. You're all family. This affects all of you. Eleanor took a sip of water, buying herself precious seconds. Jessica, the story I've told you about your father, about Robert, about the accident, it's not what happened. Jessica's fork clattered against her plate. What do you mean, not what happened? He died before I was born. You've told me that my entire life. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, summoning courage from some deep reserve. When she opened them, she looked directly at her daughter. Your father didn't die, Jessica. He's alive, and his name isn't Robert Thompson. It's Daniel Mercer. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Jessica's face drained of color, her eyes widening with incomprehension, then disbelief, then the first flickers of anger. What are you saying? She whispered, her voice unnaturally high. This isn't funny, Mom. I wish it were a joke. Eleanor replied, her own voice surprisingly steady. now that the first terrible words had been spoken. "But it's the truth. I've kept it from you for 30 years and I can't do it anymore." "Mom," Jessica's voice cracked on the word, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Are you telling me my father is alive? That everything you've ever told me about him was a lie?" Lily looked between her mother and grandmother, confusion and shock evident on her young face. Michael placed a protective hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Not everything was a lie," Eleanor said, tears now streaming freely down her face. "He was an architect. He was brilliant and kind, and would have loved you so much. But yes, the rest I invented." "Why?" The single word exploded from Jessica with such force that Eleanor physically recoiled. "Why would you lie about something like this?" Eleanor had prepared for this question, had rehearsed her answer meticulously, but in the face of her daughter's raw pain, all her careful explanations crumbled. "I thought I was protecting you both," she said simply. "I was young and scared and made a decision that seemed right at the time. And then days became weeks, weeks became years, and the lie was too big to take back. Did he not want me?" Jessica asked, her voice small again, vulnerable in a way Eleanor hadn't heard since she was a child. "No." Eleanor reached across the table, desperate to touch her daughter, but Jessica pulled back. "He doesn't know about you, Jessica. That's part of what I need to tell you. He never knew." Jessica's expression morphed from hurt to horror. "He doesn't know. You didn't just lie to me. You kept me from him for 30 years? Michael stood abruptly. "Lily, why don't you go watch TV in the den for a bit?" "But Dad, now please," he said firmly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. When Lily had reluctantly left, Jessica let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "I don't even know what questions to ask first. Who is he? Where is he? Does he have another family? Have I passed him on the street without knowing? God, Mom, how could you do this?" Eleanor reached into her pocket and withdrew the envelope containing Daniel's letter. "His name is Daniel Mercer. He lives in Chicago. He's an architect, like you. We were together in college before I moved to New York. And no, he doesn't have other children." Jessica stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. "And why are you telling me this now, after 30 years of lies?" "He's dying," Eleanor said, the words falling into the room like stones. "Daniel has pancreatic cancer. He reached out to me, wanting to make peace before the end." Jessica stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward, crashing against the hardwood floor. "So that's why. You're not telling me because it's right, or because I deserve to know. You're telling me because he's dying, and now you feel guilty." "That's not fair," Eleanor began, but Jessica cut her off with a slashing motion of her hand. "Fair? You want to talk to me about what's fair?" Her voice rose, trembling with rage. "Was it fair to lie to me my whole life? Was it fair to deny me a father? Was it fair to deny him a daughter?" Michael stepped forward, his calm presence a counterpoint to the storm of emotions. "Jessica, maybe we should all take a breath." "Don't," Jessica warned, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "This isn't something a few deep breaths can fix." She turned back to her mother. "Give me the letter." Eleanor handed over Daniel's letter with shaking hands. Jessica read it silently, her expression cycling through disbelief, pain, and a fierce, focused anger. "He doesn't even know I exist," she whispered finally. "He thinks his life is ending, without ever having had children." Eleanor nodded miserably. "My whole life," Jessica continued, her voice low and dangerous now, "I've carried this image of a father who died tragically, who never got to see me grow up. I've mourned someone who never existed while my real father was alive. What, 2 hours away by plane? Did you ever think about what you were stealing from both of us?" "Every day," Eleanor admitted, her own tears flowing freely now. "I thought about it every single day, but not enough to tell the truth." Eleanor had no answer for that. Jessica paced the dining room, the letter clutched in her hand, occasionally stopping to stare at her mother as if seeing a stranger. "The sketchbook," she said suddenly, "the one in the attic. That was his, wasn't it?" Eleanor nodded. "And that's why you acted so strange when I wanted to keep it." "God, Mom, were there other clues I missed? Other moments when you almost told me?" "So many," Eleanor whispered. "When you decided to study architecture, when Lily was born, when you won that design award last year. Every time I saw him in you, I almost confessed. But you didn't," Jessica said flatly. "You just kept building on the lie." "Michael, who had been silent for some time, finally spoke. "Jessica, I know you're hurt and angry, and you have every right to be. But your mother is trying to make it right now." Jessica whirled on him. "Make it right? How can this ever be made right? 30 years of lies can't be undone with one conversation." "No," Eleanor agreed quietly. "They can't. But maybe, you can still have some time with your father before." The word "dies" hung unspoken between them. Jessica sank into a chair, the letter limp in her hand. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she said, her voice hollow. "Half of my identity was built on a fiction, the stories about him that helped shape me. They were all made up." "Not everything was a lie," Eleanor insisted. "Daniel is brilliant, creative, passionate about architecture. All the things I told you about your father, those parts were real. Borrowed truth wrapped in lies," Jessica countered. "Tell me everything, Mom. No more editing, no more protecting me. I want all of it." For the next hour, Eleanor spoke without interruption, laying bare the full story. Her relationship with Daniel, her pregnancy, her decision to keep Jessica from him, the elaborate fiction she'd constructed with her mother's help, the decades of deception. As she spoke, Jessica's expression gradually shifted from anger to something more complex, a deep, contemplative pain mixed with flashes of understanding. "So you were scared," Jessica said when Eleanor finally finished. "Young and scared and faced with an impossible choice." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, "but that doesn't excuse what I did." "No, it doesn't," Jessica agreed, her voice steady now, "but it helps me understand." A silence fell between them, heavy with 3 decades of secrecy and its aftermath. "What do I do now?" Jessica finally asked, her vulnerability piercing Eleanor's heart. "Do I call him? Write to him? Fly to Chicago and knock on his door? 'Hi, I'm your daughter you never knew existed'?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "That's for you to decide, but I'll help however I can." Jessica laughed bitterly. "That's generous, considering you're the one who created this mess." She stood up, gathering her purse. "I need to go. I need to think." "Jessica, please." Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand. "Don't." Jessica pulled away. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Right now, I just need space." Michael stepped forward. "I'll call Lily. We should go." As they prepared to leave, Jessica paused at the door, turning to face her mother one last time. "How long does he have? Daniel, I mean." "The doctors gave him a few months," Eleanor replied softly. "But that was when he wrote the letter." "I don't know exactly." Jessica nodded, absorbing this information with a strange calm that frightened Eleanor more than her earlier anger. "Jessica," Eleanor tried once more. "I am so sorry." Her daughter looked at her, eyes filled with a lifetime of rewritten history. "You know what the worst part is? I spent my whole life believing I knew who my father was. This perfect, tragic figure who would have loved me if he'd had the chance. Now I have to mourn that father who never existed while somehow processing that my real father has been out there all along, never knowing about me, and I have to do all of this while he's dying." She shook her head slowly. "How am I supposed to navigate that, Mom? How does anyone?" With that, she was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in the beautiful dining room with the half-eaten Mother's Day meal, surrounded by the wreckage of 30 years of deception. 3 days after the disastrous Mother's Day revelation, Jessica sat in her home office, surrounded by architectural drawings that demanded her attention, but couldn't hold her focus. Her phone buzzed for the 20th time that morning. Eleanor, calling again. She ignored it, as she had every call since walking out of her mother's house. Michael appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "Your mom again?" Jessica nodded, not looking up from the blueprint she'd been staring at. "Without seeing for the past hour, don't you think you should talk to her?" He ventured carefully. "It's been 3 days, and it's been 30 years of lies," Jessica countered, finally meeting his eyes. "I think I'm entitled to a few days of silence." Michael crossed the room and perched on the edge of her desk. "I'm not defending what she did, Jess, but she's still your mother, and she's hurting too." "Good." The word came out sharper than Jessica intended. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to process any of this. Every time I think I'm getting a handle on it, another memory surfaces, another moment when she actively maintained the lie, and I'm furious all over again." "I know," Michael said softly, "but there's more at stake here than just your relationship with your mom. There's also Daniel." Jessica finished, the name still strange on her tongue. Not dad or father, just Daniel, a stranger who shared her DNA, and apparently, her professional passion. She'd spent hours online researching him after the revelation, hungry for any scrap of information. Daniel Mercer, founding partner at Mercer & Klein Architecture in Chicago, winner of several prestigious awards, designer of notable public spaces throughout the Midwest, a respected figure in sustainable urban design. But these facts told her nothing about the man himself. Did he have her same inability to sit still during movies? Her habit of humming while deep in thought? Her preference for strawberry ice cream, which Eleanor had always attributed to her fictional father? "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Michael asked, interrupting her thoughts. Jessica opened her desk drawer and removed Daniel's letter, which she'd read so many times in the past 3 days that she had memorized it. "I think I need to meet him," she said quietly, "before it's too late. Not just for him, but for me. I have questions only he can answer." "I think that's the right decision." Michael nodded, relief evident in his voice. "Do you want me to come with you?" Jessica considered this. "Not at first. I think this initial meeting needs to be just us. But maybe you and Lily could come later if things go well." "Of course." He squeezed her hand. "Whatever you need." That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jessica finally answered one of Eleanor's calls. "Jessica," her mother's voice was thick with tears. "Thank God. I've been so worried." "I need his phone number," Jessica said without preamble. A pause, then, "Of course, I'll text it to you right away. Thank you." Jessica was about to hang up when Eleanor spoke again. "Jessica, please, can we talk?" She closed her eyes, feeling the tug of 30 years of love and trust against the raw wound of betrayal. "Not yet, Mom. I need more time." The call to Daniel was the hardest thing Jessica had ever done. Her finger hovered over the number for nearly an hour before she found the courage to press call. "Hello?" His voice was weaker than she'd imagined, but there was something in its cadence that struck a chord of recognition somewhere deep inside her. "Mr. Mercer," she began formally, her heart pounding. "My name is Jessica Thompson. I'm Eleanor Walsh's daughter." The silence on the other end stretched for so long that Jessica wondered if the connection had been lost. "Daniel?" she prompted. "I'm here," he replied, his voice now trembling slightly. "Eleanor's daughter. I didn't know she had a child." Jessica took a deep breath. "That's why I'm calling. She didn't just have a child. She had your child. I'm your daughter, Daniel." The sharp intake of breath was followed by another long silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "How? When? 30 years ago," Jessica supplied. "She was pregnant when you left for Chicago. She never told you." 30 years, he repeated, the words heavy with lost time. "I have a 30-year-old daughter. I'm an architect," Jessica found herself saying, as if this shared profession might bridge the impossible gap between them. "I live in Boston with my husband and our daughter. I have a granddaughter," Daniel said, wonder replacing shock in his voice. Then, with sudden urgency, "Jessica, can I see you? Soon? I don't have much time left, and I know about your diagnosis," she interrupted gently. "Mom told me everything, and yes, I want to meet you. I have so many questions." They arranged for Jessica to fly to Chicago the following weekend. As she hung up, a strange mixture of grief and anticipation washed over her. She was going to meet her father for the first time, only to begin the process of saying goodbye. The night before her flight, Jessica finally went to Eleanor's house. Her mother opened the door immediately, as if she'd been waiting by it. "Jessica," she breathed, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. "I'm going to Chicago tomorrow," Jessica said. "I'm going to meet him." Eleanor nodded, stepping back to let her daughter enter. "I thought you might be. How are you feeling?" "Honestly, I don't know." Jessica moved into the familiar living room, now seeing it through new eyes. Every photograph, every memory now tainted with the knowledge of the lie at their foundation. Scared, angry, curious, sad, all of it at once. "That's understandable," Eleanor said carefully, keeping her distance as if afraid any sudden movement might send Jessica fleeing again. "I still don't forgive you," Jessica stated plainly. "I don't know if I ever can." "I know," Eleanor whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I wouldn't expect you to." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 30 years hanging between Them. Before I go, Jessica finally said, I need to know one more thing. Did you ever love him? Really love him? Or was that part of the fiction too? Eleanor's face softened, a distant look coming into her eyes. I loved him more than I thought. It was possible to love anyone, until you were born. Then I discovered there were depths to love I hadn't imagined. Jessica nodded, absorbing this truth that felt like the first honest thing she'd heard from her mother in days. Then help me understand him, she said. Not the fictional father you created, but the real man I'm going to meet tomorrow. Help me. Know my father. 1 year later, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. Peonies again, but this time accompanied by stargazer lilies, Daniel's favorite. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she now knew his actual preferences, rather than the fictional details she'd invented decades ago. The doorbell rang, and for a moment, déjà vu washed over her. Another Mother's Day, another family gathering, the weight of secrets between them. But this year was different. This year, the truth had space at the table. Jessica stood on the doorstep, Lily and Michael behind her. But there was someone else too, a man in a wheelchair, frail but smiling, his eyes so much like Jessica's that it took Eleanor's breath away. Daniel, she whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. Hello, Eleanor, he replied, his voice weaker than it had been a year ago, but with the same warmth she remembered from their youth. Your daughter insisted I join your Mother's Day celebration. I hope that's all right. Eleanor looked at Jessica, who offered a small, careful smile. Not forgiveness exactly, but something closer to understanding. Of course it's all right. Eleanor managed, stepping back to let them enter. Please come in. The past year had transformed all of them. For Jessica, the journey had begun with that first trip to Chicago, a weekend of tentative conversations, shared silences, and the strange experience of seeing her own mannerisms reflected in a near stranger. He laughs exactly like you do, she'd told Lily after that first visit, and he sketches constantly, just like you. Over the following months, as Daniel's health permitted, they'd built a relationship that defied conventional labels, not quite father and daughter in the traditional sense, but connected by something equally powerful. Jessica had brought Michael and Lily to meet him, expanding the circle of family Daniel had never known he had. For Eleanor, the year had been one of painful growth. The initial fracture in her relationship with Jessica had slowly, tentatively begun to heal, not with grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations, but through small moments of honesty. They'd started seeing a family therapist together, navigating the complex landscape of betrayal, understanding, and the possibility of forgiveness. And for Daniel, whose doctors had initially given him only months to live, the discovery of his daughter and granddaughter had sparked what his oncologist called a remarkable rally. While the cancer was still terminal, he'd defied expectations, living to see Jessica's birthday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and now, against all odds, Mother's Day. The table looks beautiful, Jessica commented as they moved into the dining room. The setting was simpler this year. No fancy china or elaborate centerpiece, just honest food and space for conversation. As they settled around the table, the initial awkwardness gradually gave way to something warmer. Lily, with the adaptability of youth, had embraced Daniel completely as her grandfather, and her easy chatter filled any potential silences. Gramps showed me how to draw a perfect arch last week, she announced, using the nickname she'd bestowed on Daniel almost immediately upon meeting him. He says I have a good eye for structure. She does, Daniel confirmed, the pride in his voice unmistakable, better than I had at her age. Eleanor watched this exchange, a complex emotion swelling in her chest. This was what she'd denied them all for 30 years. These simple moments of connection, of shared traits and mutual recognition. During dessert, Daniel caught Eleanor's eye across the table. Do you remember that cafe in Boston? He asked. Suddenly, the one with the terrible coffee but the amazing cherry pie? Eleanor smiled, memories flooding back. Rosie's, on the corner of Commonwealth and Berkeley. That's it, he nodded. I was trying to tell Jessica about it last week but couldn't remember the name. This casual mention of their shared past, not with anger or accusation, but as a simple fact, of their intersecting histories, felt like permission to Eleanor. Permission to remember, to acknowledge, to integrate their past with their present. After the meal, while Michael and Lily cleared the table, Jessica helped Daniel out onto the patio for some fresh air. Eleanor followed at a distance, giving them space, but unable to completely stay away. "I got you something," she heard Jessica say, handing Daniel a small package. "For your collection." Daniel unwrapped it carefully, revealing a framed black and white photograph of the Boston skyline from the early 1980s. Their Boston, as it had been when they were young and in love. "Jessica," he breathed, his fingers tracing the glass. "This is perfect. Mom helped me find it," Jessica admitted, glancing back to where Eleanor stood by the door. She remembered which view you liked best. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at this small acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but inclusion in their newly forming bond. Later, as the afternoon light began to fade and Daniel's energy waned, he asked for a moment alone with Eleanor. Jessica hesitated, then nodded, squeezing her father's shoulder before leaving them on the patio. "I didn't think I'd see another spring," Daniel said once they were alone. "Let alone be sitting here with you, with our daughter, with our granddaughter." "Daniel, Eleanor began, but he held up a hand. "I'm not here for apologies, Eleanor. We've moved beyond that, I think." His gaze was direct, clear despite his illness. "What you did was wrong, but I understand why you did it. Fear makes us do unimaginable things." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "What matters now is this," he continued, gesturing towards the house where their daughter and her family moved about. "This family we somehow created, despite everything, the time we have left, as the sun set on that Mother's Day, casting long shadows across Eleanor's garden. The four adults sat together on the patio while Lily sketched them. Her family, complicated and imperfect and real. Eleanor looked around at these people bound together by blood, by choice, by forgiveness still in progress, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 30 years. The lightness of truth, the freedom of secrets finally spoken. It wasn't a perfect ending. Daniel's illness still advanced. Jessica's hurt still surfaced in unexpected moments, and Eleanor's guilt still visited her in the quiet hours. But it was an honest one. And after 3 decades of living in fiction, honesty felt like the greatest gift of all. Some secrets have the power to both destroy and heal. Eleanor's 3-decade deception nearly shattered her relationship with Jessica, but the truth, painful as it was, created space for something new to grow. A family bound not by perfect choices, but by the messy, complicated reality of human love. This story reminds us that even our worst mistakes don't define us completely. Eleanor made a choice as a frightened young woman that spiraled into years of deception, but her courage in finally revealing the truth, despite the risk of losing her daughter's love, showed the depth of her character. For Jessica, the discovery that her life had been built on a foundation of lies forced her to question everything she thought she knew about herself. Yet in finding her father, she also found parts of herself she never knew were missing. In Daniel's face, his mannerisms, his passion for architecture, she recognized reflections of her own identity that had previously been unexplained. And Daniel, facing the end of his life believing he would leave no legacy, instead discovered he had a daughter and granddaughter who carried forward not just his genetic material, but his creative vision and spirit. Their story speaks to the resilience of family bonds, how they can bend under the weight of betrayal without completely breaking, how forgiveness doesn't happen in an instant, but unfolds gradually through small acts of understanding and compassion. It also illustrates how secrets, no matter how deeply buried, find ways to surface. Eleanor's decision to finally tell the truth came from her own conscience, but had she not chosen to reveal it, Daniel's letter would have forced the issue eventually. Perhaps most importantly, this family's journey reminds us that it's never too late for truth, for reconciliation, for new beginnings. Even with Daniel's limited time, the months they shared created memories and connections that would outlive him, changing the trajectory of all their lives. As we leave Eleanor, Jessica, Daniel, and their extended family on that Mother's Day patio, we're reminded that while the past cannot be changed, the meaning we make of it, and the future we build from it, remains within our power. Their story isn't about perfect resolution or fairy tale endings. It's about the courage to face difficult truths, the capacity to begin healing even from the deepest wounds, and the unexpected gifts that can emerge from our most painful chapters. In the end, Eleanor's secret, the burden she carried for 30 years, became the catalyst for a different kind of family than any of them had imagined. Not perfect, not unmarked by pain, but authentic in a way that her carefully constructed fiction could never be.